Motion is adopted without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The question is on the passage of the joint resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Where? Right here.
Recorded vote.
Yeas and nays. Okay, your recorded vote is requested. Those in favor in recorded vote will rise. Sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members record their vote by electronic device, a 5-minute vote.
And so you just heard the chair there saying it's a 5-minute vote here. This is for funding for the Federal Aviation Administration to open up that part of the government. House Republicans continuing on their strategy to open up the government piecemeal. After that is a vote expected on death benefits for fallen soldiers. Back to your phone calls here. Paul, thanks for waiting. Go ahead, Republican line.
Yes, I can't believe it's taken so long. The employees here in the park are waiting patiently, and the fact that it's gotten this far really is just very irritating.
Paul, what's been the impact?
Well, the employees can't work due to the closure, and I for one am allergic to debt, unlike our politicians. That's just unacceptable, and sooner they get this resolved, the better.
Okay, so Paul, let me ask you, who do you blame? Which party? You're calling on the Republican line.
I blame both. I'm more of an independent myself.
Okay.
All of them, Boehner, Harry Reid, they're all accountable.
So how will you vote in 2014?
Not for those guys. Have to take a look at the ballot, but it's just, I wish I could impeach those guys.
All right. Tanya in Virginia, Democratic caller. You're up next, Tanya.
Yes, hi. I'm calling because I think a lot of these Republicans are getting basic phone calls from all their sponsors, letting them know that 2014 to come, if they're coming to be reelected. I think that they have a lot to do with it. And I think a lot of these Republicans don't have no say about what's going on. I think these sponsors are basically telling them, look, hey, you better say what I want you to say. It's like their whole government now is run by these big-time sponsors now. These people don't have no say in nothing because they're afraid they're going to lose their election. And they don't realize what these people that don't have that much are going through. They don't have no food. They can't pay their rent, losing their cars. My daughter's boyfriend works for the government. And because he didn't basically have a check to basically send to his car, they told him he has 30 days or they repossess his car. Because he was always behind, like a month. But because of this, it's not even acceptable. It's not called for. They need to basically come to some agreement between the Democrats and the Republicans and get this open ASAP.
All right.
Stop.
All right, Tanya. Well, Chad Program, Fox producer up on Capitol Hill, just tweeted this out. Representative Fleming, who is a Republican from Louisiana, represents the 4th District, says short-term debt ceiling increase would only be for 6 weeks or so to work out the rest of the details. So that from Capitol Hill. We'll see how it all shakes out as the back and forth continues on day 9 of the government shutdown. One caller previously mentioned impeaching both leaders of both parties. And this from Right Wing Watch. It was an interview that Michelle Bachmann, a Republican from Minnesota, did yesterday on a Tea Party radio show where she says Obama committed impeachable offenses and wants to be a dictator. The Minnesota congressman who recently said that Obama is aiding al-Qaeda and plunged the world into the end times told Tea Party activists that, quote, we could be on the cusp of seeing civil disobedience, similar to what happened in Egypt, because people aren't going to take this thuggery of this president much longer. JP, an independent, Chattanooga, Tennessee. Hi, JP.
Hey, how are you doing?
Morning or afternoon.
Yeah, afternoon. Good after morning, it is. Listen, I was listening to your show. We listened to it quite a bit. Listen, what I'm wondering is, now I'm an independent caller, but I am a registered Democrat. And that's the way I registered first time. But the last few elections, that's not the way I've been voting. I do hold more of the Democrats being a Democrat at fault. At least the Republicans and the House of Representatives are trying to work and trying to pass things. If people will look back at the history of every time we've had shutdowns, and in fact, we've had 8 shutdowns under Reagan, 5 shutdowns under Carter, they've never passed 85 to 90% of the time when things were passed on the budget or anything, it was passed through one piece at a time.
Okay, JP, I'm going to leave it there. We need to go back to the House. We'll take a pause from your calls and go back for this next vote.
On this vote, the yeas are 252, the nays are 172. The joint resolution is passed without objection. A motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The unfinished business is a vote on the motion of the gentleman from New Jersey, Ms. Freelandhausen, to suspend the rules and pass House Joint Resolution 91, on which the yeas and nays were ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
House Joint Resolution 91, Joint Resolution making continuing appropriations for death gratuities and related survivor benefits for survivors of deceased military service members of the Department of Defense for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
And this will be the last vote of the day for the House. This vote, under the suspension of the rules, requires 2/3 of the House to approve it, and that is to repeal and continue 100,000 payments to families of fallen service members, so-called death benefits that you've probably heard a lot about. And then what happens from there, we'll have to wait and see what the Senate will have to do in order to restore those death benefits. We'll hear from Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. He's expected to come to the floor around 5 p.m. That'll be on C-SPAN 2, but we'll see what the White House does about it as well. As we heard from White House spokesman Jay Carney earlier today, saying the president wants to resolve this problem. So we'll see where it goes from here. After the House votes here, then they will be done for the day, but they are back in over the weekend. They will be coming in on Saturday at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. So in the meantime, while we wait and watch this vote, we'll go back to your phone calls. James, San Antonio, Texas, a Republican caller. Hi, James.
Hello. I'm a disabled Vietnam vet, and I don't like what the Democrats are doing, okay? There is a way out of this thing. The Democrats can vote for what the Republicans already put on the floor, and then give the people a vote on the Obamacare, like they do when they vote for a president. The people did not vote for Obamacare. Obamacare was passed through without the people's consent. The United States was built for the people and by the people, and those people work for the people, all of them, including Obama.
All right, James. Richard, Austin, Texas, independent caller. Richard?
Yes.
You're on the air.
My question is, how come when people don't do their jobs, they get fired or don't get paid. Everyone up there that can't agree on nothing, they can't do their jobs or we wouldn't be shut down. How come they still get paid and they still are in there?
You think they should not be getting paid?
I think before they cut the disabled people money out and before they cut retired people's money out, I think they ought to start at the top, cut their wages, and let them go for a while without pay and see how they like it. I believe they'd come to agreements quicker than what they are now.
All right. Stephen in Pennsylvania, Republican caller. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, how are you? The GOP has offered here on day 9 and all the days up to day 9 to fund everything except Obamacare. And I think it'd be wise right now for the Democrats to go ahead and vote and fund everything except Obamacare and not raise the debt limit, but to get everything going again, maybe go back and settle their differences with the debt limit and Obamacare. But for right now, the American people, what we need is for them to fund the American people and all the different programs that need to be funded, and they can go back and settle this Obamacare later. That's my opinion.
Okay. All right, Stephen. Terrence, Cherry Hill, New Jersey, Democratic caller.
Yes, I think that the government, so I say that Republicans should stop trying to put bills through separately and let them all come through all together. Because, I mean, one bill at a time, what they're trying to do is not fund the government as much as it needs to be funded to take care of everything like it's supposed to be taken care of. So they're trying to do it piece by piece where they hold back for the poor people of the country. I mean, they want to cut out all the poor people's benefits, and I don't feel as though that's right. I mean, they deserve to live too. They're still for the rich people and not for the poor. And Obamacare was a law that was passed, and it's going through and it's in motion as of October 1st, and it's doing very well, and it's going to continue to do well. There's nothing they can do about that now, so they're just wasting time attaching Obamacare to to the main budget that's going through.
Okay, Terrence, I'm going to leave it there. The House is wrapping up this last vote of the day. House Democrats headed over to the White House this afternoon to meet with the President, and House Speaker John Boehner saying that a group of GOP, a small group of Republicans, will be heading to the White House Thursday. So let's bring you back to the House. Live coverage here on C-SPAN as they wrap up their last vote of the day to restore death benefits to fallen soldiers.
Vote the yeas are 425, the nays are 0. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The joint resolution is agreed to, and without objection, motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose the gentleman from Florida rise? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Most people are astounded. They're absolutely amazed to learn. Mr. Speaker, House is not in order.
The House will come to order. Please take conversations off the floor. Members, please clear the aisles. Members, please cease conversations upon the floor. Please cease conversations on the floor. The gentleman will continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Most people are surprised to learn, actually they're stunned and amazed to discover that the Senate and the House have agreed, at least for the next 5 weeks, on a level of funding. This is not an argument about money. The shutdown is not about money. There's only 2 issues stopping the shutdown from coming to an end right this second. The President was on television yesterday for over an hour, but never mentioned those 2 issues. We've agreed on the money. Here's the issues. Make Congress and the White House obey the same Obamacare rules as everybody else in the United States of America. Now, the President gave big business and special interest a 1-year break from being a part of Obamacare. We want America's workers and families who work hard and play by the rules to have the same advantage.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Part of my time got used up quieting the chamber, Mr. Speaker.
What purpose does the gentlewoman from Arizona rise? Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I stand here on behalf of my Arizona district to once again make a simple request. Allow a vote on a clean funding bill to reopen the government. In the past week, House GOP leaders only allowed piecemeal votes on bills that went nowhere. Yesterday they did it again, this time with Head Start funding, which is important for the 12 Native American tribes in my district. Schools on tribal land have already taken a massive hit with sequestration cuts, and now the shutdown is continuing this pain. Not just with cuts to Head Start and impact aid, but with furloughs from the Indian Health Service and with cuts in funding for programs that protect women from violence. These piecemeal games are a dead end. They only prolong the shutdown. If House leadership were genuinely concerned about programs like Head Start or impact aid, they would allow a vote to reopen the government. Congress should stop picking winners and losers. This is not a game. We demand a vote on the budget.
What purpose does the gentlewoman from Minnesota rise?
I ask to address the House for 1 minute and also permission to revise and extend.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to reiterate again that the bodies have agreed on the general numbers that we have to look at to deal with our budget. We need to do it, we need to get it done, and we need to get people back to work here in the United States of America. But one thing that shocked me, Mr. Speaker, last Saturday, I went with my colleague Steve King out to the House Mall because we wanted to open up the World War II Memorial, the Korean Memorial, the Vietnam Memorial so that our veterans and the American people could go visit. We were absolutely shocked to find the level of intimidation that was going on, where police dogs would be held by park rangers and mounted police in front of these barriers, in front of these monuments. That's shameful. What was even more shameful is that there were 90-year-old people in 90-degree weather, and the park system had shut down not only the water fountains, but also the bathrooms. Here you have individuals
10 honor flights coming in to visit the World War II Memorial, and in one of the most undignified acts I've ever seen, the greatest generation was denied access to a public bathroom in the national park. That's terrible. We wouldn't do that to anyone, and that's why we need to get our act together and get this taken care of. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. For what purposes the gentleman from Nevada seek recognition? Objection. The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I come to the floor today to give credit where credit is due, to commend a Republican who understands the negative consequences of this shutdown. That is the governor from my home state of Nevada, Governor Brian Sandoval. Yesterday, he told the Las Vegas Sun that Nevada is struggling because of this ongoing shutdown. He said that Nevadans are going to see catastrophic issues going on for the state if the shutdown continues. The Sun reported that 362,000 food stamp recipients will see benefits end on November 1st as state employees who administer the program face potential furloughs. In addition, 425,000 women, infants, and children would be cut from food assistance rolls. Rape crisis call centers may be closed. Unemployment claims will not be processed. Republicans in Congress need to recognize what's happening in their states. Listen to your constituents. Listen to your state legislators and governors. This shutdown needs to end, and it needs to end now. I'd like to submit the governor's letter to our delegation asking us to work together to end this GOP shutdown now.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute and ask to advise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, gentleman, Mr. Hudson is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, it's been 8 days. 8 days since the government was shut down. The Postal Service is still running. Social Security and unemployment checks are being processed. Citizens can get passports and food stamps. And certain groups that have the right ideology are even given permits to protest on our national mall. Yet for some reason, our military families, including those at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, cannot receive emergency death benefits. This is worse than excusable. It's shameful. Last week, Congress unanimously passed the Pay Our Military Act with the intent that all military pay and allowances will be dispersed during the government shutdown. Unfortunately, this administration has been playing political theater with the families of our war heroes who have made the ultimate sacrifice. To make our intent crystal clear, today the House passed the Honoring Families of Fallen Soldiers Act. Certain things should transcend politics, and it is up to the Senate and the administration. In fact, they have a moral obligation to join the efforts of the House to fix this problem and express our deepest gratitude to the families of our heroes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman's time has expired. Are there any further 1 minute requests? And under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. DeSantis, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to discuss an issue of increasing relevance to our national affairs and to constitutional government properly understood, and that is the requirement that the President faithfully enforce the laws of the land and the failure of the current incumbent to satisfy that obligation. The Constitution sets out a simple yet effective structure. The major powers of government, legislative, executive, and judicial, are divided into 3 separate branches of government. The legislative branch, the Congress, passes laws, makes laws. The executive branch, the President, enforces laws. And the judicial branch, Supreme Court and inferior courts, interpret laws. Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution imposes upon the President the duty to, quote, take care that the laws be faithfully executed. This duty has roots in Anglo-American law dating back to the Glorious Revolution of 17th century Britain. In fact, the English Bill of Rights of 1689 provided that, quote, the pretended power of suspending laws or the execution of laws by regal authority without the consent of Parliament is illegal, end quote. For his part, the founder of our country, George Washington, saw the faithful execution of the law to be one of the President's core responsibilities. In a letter to Alexander Hamilton, then President Washington explained that the Constitution's Take Care Clause meant, quote, "It is my duty to see the laws executed. To permit them to be trampled on with impunity would be repugnant to his duty." The duty of the President to take care that the laws be faithfully executed is a central component not simply of the executive branch of government, but to the entire constitutional system. And yet the conduct of the current incumbent has evinced a disregard for this core constitutional duty. By picking and choosing which laws to enforce, the President has undermined the constitutional order and has failed to keep faith with the basic idea that ours is a government of laws, not of men. Now, the most conspicuous vehicle for the President's disregard of the take care duty has been the implementation of the law that bears his name, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, a.k.a. Obamacare. Now, it is interesting that of all the arguments that have been put forward to counter those who seek to defund, delay, or repeal this law, the one that Obamacare supporters have embraced most frequently as of late goes like this: Obamacare is the law of the land, has been upheld by the Supreme Court, therefore it cannot be repealed, defunded, or delayed. Now, this is a nonsensical argument on its face. Congress has the authority to legislate per Article 1 of the Constitution and can amend, supersede, or repeal ordinary legislation as it sees fit. But this argument is particularly rich regarding Obamacare, because if this law is somehow sacrosanct, then why is the President not enforcing it as written? It is untenable to assert that Congress cannot change the law through legislation, but that the President can delay or waive provisions of the law by executive fiat. And Exhibit A for this, as it relates to Obamacare, is the President's unilateral decision for 1 year to delay the enforcement of the so-called employer mandate, a central provision of Obamacare requiring most businesses to provide government-sanctioned insurance to their employees. Now, Section 1513 Delta of that law states that the employer mandate, quote, shall apply to the months beginning after December 31st, 2013. Note the statutory command of shall. This is not discretionary, and there's no provision of the law permitting the executive to delay it. Incredibly, the President has not offered any coherent rationale for his actions. He was asked in an interview at the New York Times whether his critics were justified in asserting that he lacked authority to delay the mandate. He responded by saying, quote, if Congress thinks that what I've done is inappropriate or wrong in some fashion, they're free to make that case. But there's not an action that I take that you don't have some folks in Congress who say that I'm usurping my authority. Some of those folks think I usurp my authority by having the gall to win the presidency. And I don't think that's a secret. But ultimately, I'm not concerned about their opinions. Very few of them, by the way, are lawyers, much less constitutional lawyers, end quote. In other words, the President doesn't care what Congress thinks as elected representatives of the people and feels no need to justify his official conduct. Now, a couple weeks later, he was asked again about this decision to unilaterally delay the mandate. And he said, look, he didn't simply choose to delay this on my own because the decision was made, quote, in consultation with businesses all across the country. Now, I have searched the Constitution in vain for the provision allowing the President to suspend Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution so long as he consults with business. But I have not found it. What is even worse, though, is that the President further justified his conduct by stating, quote, in a normal political environment, it would have been easier for me to simply call up the Speaker and say, you know what, this is a tweak that doesn't go to the essence of the law. Let's make a technical change of the law. That would be the normal thing that I would prefer to do, but we're not in a normal atmosphere around here when it comes to, quote, unquote, Obamacare. And that's the end of the President's quote. Now, this is absurd. The Constitution doesn't relieve the President of his duty to faithfully enforce the law simply because the political environment is difficult. Second, the President didn't in fact need to call the Speaker because a couple weeks before his comment, this House voted 264 to 161, with 35 members of the other party voting yes, to delay the mandate by law for 1 year. Most of us in the House actually think that as a matter of policy, the employer mandate is bad for the economy. The President responded to our request to delay the employer mandate by threatening to veto the bill. Now, with respect to the employer mandate, the Emperor truly has no clothes. The unilateral delay of this mandate is not consistent with the Constitution's Take Care Clause and is an abridgment of Congress's constitutional duty to make the law. The separation of powers is designed to ensure a government of laws, not of men. This President is content to be a law unto himself. Now, the employer mandate delay is not an exception that proves the rule, unfortunately. Far from it. The entire enterprise of Obamacare implementation has been an exercise in the administration picking and choosing which provisions to enforce and which provisions to delay or waive. Rather than implement the law as written, the President is rewriting the law as he goes along. The following list represents a pretty impressive display of this lawlessness. Obamacare contains a statutory cap on out-of-pocket health costs, yet the President suspended this provision, most likely because he feared it would lead to health insurance premiums rising even more than they already are. Second, the law requires state-based Obamacare health insurance exchanges to verify whether applicants for exchange subsidies qualify for subsidies based on their income level. The President suspended this requirement, thereby allowing taxpayer money to be handed out based on the honor system, and we know that is going to hit the taxpayer more than if you actually enforce the regulations. The plain text of Obamacare also provides that subsidies can only flow through state-based exchanges, yet the President's IRS is disregarding this requirement and is allowing subsidies to flow to federal exchanges. So this is creating, I think, a patently unjust scenario. The law imposes substantial burdens on society as a whole, but those with political connections, employers, insurance companies, what have you, are granted delays and or waivers from the law's burdens. This is precisely contrary to James Madison's admonition in the Federalist 57 that there should be, quote, no law which will not have its full operation on the political class and their friends as well as on the great mass of society. The most egregious example, though, of political favoritism via executive branch lawlessness has got to be the illicit bailout for members of Congress with respect to congressional health plans. Now, when the bill was being debated several years ago, the American people were told we have to pass the bill to find out what was in the bill. And sure enough, the law contained all sorts of surprises, including an interesting provision regarding health care for members of Congress. Now, there is broad agreement among analysts who've looked at the effects of Obamacare that the law's structures and incentives will cause millions of Americans to lose their employer-provided coverage and get pushed into these health care exchanges. The only dispute really is how many millions of Americans will suffer this fate. Congressional Budget Office says 7 million. Other analysts have said it's going to be tens of millions of Americans. Perhaps recognizing this possibility, one section of Obamacare makes Congress eat its own cooking. The idea behind the provision is that because Obamacare will upend the health care arrangements of other Americans, members of Congress and other political insiders should be placed in exactly the same position as their fellow citizens whom they have burdened. And thus, members of Congress must go and get insurance through these Obamacare exchanges. No more gold-plated plans for Washington, given Washington is having a negative effect on other Americans. Now, one can search the health care law in vain for any provision providing members of Congress taxpayer-financed subsidies for use on these Obamacare exchanges. It's just not there. In fact, as Politico reported, the Office of Personnel Management initially said that lawmakers and staffers couldn't receive subsidies once they went into the exchange because there was no authority to give them subsidies. And this is probably also because any other American who loses their health coverage and goes into the exchanges is prohibited from getting a tax-excludable employer contribution. So this state of play didn't sit well with a lot of members of Congress. So after being lobbied by members of both the House and Senate, the President pledged to, quote, fix the issue. He ordered OPM to reverse course and grant unique taxpayer subsidies to members of Congress and other Washington insiders, again, without having a statutory authority to do so. So this is a lawlessness in service of liberating members of Congress from having to live under the terms of the laws that they impose on others. And this is creating all sorts of problems of fairness and equity. And I think the Founding Fathers had it right when they said that the President did have a duty to take care that the laws would be faithfully executed. And that word faithfulness means something. Yes, you have discretion as an executive to enforce laws, to a certain degree or not, depending on the situation. That is a natural aspect of prosecutorial discretion. But the idea that you can just supersede or delay laws by executive fiat is something that's foreign to our constitutional tradition. And I'm going to yield in a second to the gentleman from Oklahoma, but I just think about this. Had Mitt Romney won the 2012 election and he came in and started delaying or waiving parts of Obamacare with impunity and with no congressional authorization, can you imagine the uproar that we'd be hearing from the press, from our friends on the other side of the aisle? I think it would be very loud in here if that were the case. And at this time, I thank my friend from Oklahoma for coming. I will yield to him as much time as he may consume.
Well, I really appreciate it. I'd like to thank the gentleman from Florida, Ron DeSantis, who has been such a great leader on constitutional issues in this body. And I'd like to say that here you have a gentleman who went to Yale undergraduate and he played baseball. He got a law degree from Harvard, and then he decided to join the United States Navy. And he has served bravely in the United States Navy as a JAG officer, and now he's serving in the United States Congress. If there is anybody in this body who has the credibility to discuss these constitutional issues, it is my good friend from Florida, Ron DeSantis, and I appreciate your leadership on these issues. When you think about the constitutional process, Mr. Speaker, there's one particular issue that is near and dear to me, that is near and dear to my constituents, that we have seen this body go through earlier this year, and that is the issue of gun control. I think it was back in April. The President had an agenda, and Harry Reid had an agenda, and their agenda was to outlaw certain types of guns. These guns didn't operate any differently than other types of guns. They just looked scary, so they wanted to ban them. And interestingly, that effort died in the Senate, and it never came to the House of Representatives. So then they started another effort, and that effort was for what would eventually be a national gun registry. They called it universal background checks, but ultimately it would be a national gun registry, and that effort died in the Senate. Now, the constitutional process, if the President wants his agenda enacted, he needs to go to the United States Senate or the House of Representatives and pass a law in a bicameral process, and eventually it needs to go to his White House for signing. And ultimately, this bill did not have the will of the American people. This bill did not have the desire of the members in this body to pass that bill. And so what the President did recently, which I believe is egregious, is he decided to enter the United States of America into an international treaty to accomplish the very objectives that the House of Representatives and the Senate had rejected. And that's the United Nations Arms Trade Treaty. And under this treaty, anybody who purchases a gun internationally, if a gun comes from another country, maybe a Glock from Austria, well, then you have to enter into an international database. You have to enter your name and your address and your phone number. There will be an international database of anybody who buys a gun that was ultimately produced in a country other than the United States. And let me be clear about this, because I've talked to a lot of gun manufacturers. Many parts of many guns are not made in the United States. You could have a handle that's made in China. You could have a trigger that's made in Mexico. If you look at most of the guns that are made in the United States, major parts of them are made elsewhere, which means that we are going to have a national gun registry that will have an international body overseeing our national gun registry per the United Nations Arms Trade Treaty. Now, for the President of the United States to have an agenda item that doesn't get through the Senate, that doesn't get through the House of Representatives, that never comes to his desk for signing, but he is ideologically committed to this, which is a violation of the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution, for him to then enter into a treaty, in an international treaty, where there will be an international body responsible for overseeing this treaty, to me is an egregious lack of leadership and certainly violates the intention of the Constitution. The President knows full well that the Senate will never ratify this treaty. And this is another important point, I think. The President has had other agenda items. He wanted to sign us up for other treaties. The United Nations Convention for the Rights of Children, the United Nations Convention for the Rights of Women, the United Nations Convention for the Rights of the Disabled. There are all these conventions. And they're all, seemingly very good conventions. But what I would say is this: the United States of America has laws. And those laws are far more stringent than these treaties. So for what purpose would we sign on to a treaty when our laws themselves are stronger at adhering to the principles that these treaties are trying to promote? Why would we sign on? Why would we turn over our sovereignty to an international body? And I personally don't understand it. The United States is a leader in the world, and we can lead the world by example. But signing over our sovereignty so that there will be an international body that comes in and inspects our country because the President has an ideology that he couldn't get through the House, that he couldn't get through the Senate, that ultimately these treaties, were not going to be ratified by the Senate. I think it's egregious. Certainly the Second Amendment of the United States is, quite frankly, not up to debate by foreigners, and it's not up to debate by foreign bodies. And foreign governments cannot come into the United States and force us to overturn our own constitutional amendment, the Second Amendment. So that's, I think, another example of where this President has overreached beyond his constitutional authority, and certainly passing laws, not actually passing laws, but creating treaties because he can't get his laws passed that would violate our Constitution. With that, I'd like to yield back to my friend from Florida, Ron DeSantis.
Well, I thank the gentleman from Oklahoma. I thank you for those comments, and thank you for the service that you've given to the country, both here in the Congress, but particularly as a naval aviator, flying more than one platform, the E-2D Hawkeye and then also the F-18 Super Hornet. You've been deployed in harm's way numerous times, and you speak with a great deal of authority, not only on these issues, but on issues related to national security. And I think it's been great that the gentleman and I have had a mutual pact to be supporting our Blue Water Navy because there's no other weapon in the world like it when you can move a carrier 90 miles off somebody's coast and project power. So with that, I'd like to recognize another one of my colleagues, a guy who's been here before. He's walked the walk, and one of the few guys who will tell you what his principles are and will come here and will actually put those principles into action. He did it in the 90s, and he's doing it again. So I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Salmon.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to say what an honor it is to be sharing the dais with two such distinguished gentlemen who have given up their careers and sacrificed countless hours with their families to come to this body and not, as has been done before, be willing to kick the can down the road, coming to make real change, coming to try to get our arms around the real problems that are confronting our society and us as a nation. And I'd like to say that it's just a debt crisis, that it's just funding for our government, but I think we all know it's much more than that. It's about the freedoms that we hold. It's about everything that we hold dear, everything that every military person for the last 240 years have fought to defend, and that is the freedoms that our founding fathers envisioned when they started this great experiment. And we don't want to let that experiment die. And I'm so honored to be able to serve with two gentlemen that take this seriously and are willing to do more than be politicians, risk those political careers to actually do what's right. What a novel idea for Washington, D.C. I'd like to talk just about a little bit about the genesis of the President's health care law. And when we talk about the constitutionality, they cooked this thing up at a time when they knew that there was the time was running short, A new senator had just been elected from Massachusetts, so they had to act very, very quickly, or they wouldn't be able to get by the cloture vote. So that's why Nancy Pelosi ended up saying we have to pass it before we know what's in it, and then we can read it afterwards, because virtually none of those senators actually read it. And that's why I understand Wolf Blitzer just came on today and said, Mr. President, why don't you postpone Obamacare for a year? Why? Because we've seen over the last week it's a miserable failure. Its rollout has been catastrophic. And we want to stop the hemorrhage and help the American people. But how did the bill eventually become a law? It happened because they did a strike-all on a bill that was originated in the House, but they did a strike-all with language that had nothing to do with the original language. Why is that important? Because in the Constitution there's a provision called the Origination Clause, and that stipulates that any revenue bill has to originate in the House of Representatives. It has to. That's a requirement per the Constitution. But this bill actually started in the Senate. Obamacare started in the Senate. And so constitutionally, from day one, it started out on shaky footing. They violated the Constitution right out of the chute. Now let's fast forward to where we are today. Congressman DeSantis, you've done a marvelous job describing some of the inconsistencies and the breaches of the Constitution that this president has done in actually changing his own law. We say it's his own law. It's Congress's law. It's a law that a president can't enact in and of himself, and he can't change in and of himself. We don't have a line-item veto anywhere. The president can only change the law if it goes through Congress first. So like you said, Congressman DeSantis, he arbitrarily changed the date in the law from one year to the next, and you can't do that. I've heard from the Democrat Party time and time again, the folks on the other side, that they can't support this pathway that we've been going through in the last week of putting bills up on funding various aspects of government, like funding for NIH and kids with cancer, or funding our veterans, or funding our national parks. They say that that's a process of creating winners and losers, and they can't have any part of that. Well, what is President Obama doing when he's giving breaks to big business and to Congress, but he's not giving them to every other American when it comes to Obamacare? Isn't that creating winners and losers? I think it's a tad hypocritical of them to even raise that specter. But I want to talk for a little bit about what's happened in the last week and a half. Because while the president is very willing to exceed his constitutional authority to do certain things, when he does have the Constitution or constitutional authority to do something, he doesn't do it. What am I talking about? I'm talking about what's happened over the last few days with the bill that we passed last Saturday before the shutdown, funding our military, the Pay Our Military Act. It was clear in that bill, that very succinct bill, that they had the power to pay all of our military folks, including all of our civilians, and that they could go ahead and take care of the death benefits for these widows who've lost their loved ones in war. That was very, very clear. They had that ability all along. So what does the president do? He wants to use this for political leverage and make this as painful as he possibly can. So what do? They furlough several 100,000 civilian workers within the military, just so they can ratchet up the pain and make it a little bit tougher on the Republicans. Then what happens? About a week later, Chuck Hagel, the Secretary of Defense, comes out and says, oops, my bad, I guess we had the power all along. Wasn't that what we've been telling them all along? You have the power to go ahead and keep these people at work and not disrupt, but they did that for political gain so that he could make it as painful as possible. One other example, in my own state, in Arizona, we have one of the greatest national parks, the Grand Canyon. And it's not only a wonder for the entire world, but it's also a wonder for our economy. We have folks that are doing river raft trips, folks that do excursions and hikes down through the Grand Canyon, but they run into a closed park. Well, let me tell you something. I was here during 1995 when we had that last government shutdown. And guess what? We had a Democrat president. His name was Bill Clinton. We had a Republican governor, just like we do in Arizona right now. His name was Fife Symington. And what happened with the government shutdown? President Clinton worked with our Republican Governor Fife Simon to allow them to use private and state resources to keep the park open. So our governor, Governor Brewer, writes a letter to President Obama thinking that he might be somewhat similar in nature to President Clinton as far as being willing to negotiate. I mean, these are people's lives on the line. What did they get? Big fat zero. No way, you can't open it. We've seen that time and time again. We've seen it on the National Mall, that when certain groups of people want to come and take a look at the monuments or go into the National Mall, that no, the government's shut down, you can't come in, everything's shut. But yesterday, what happened in the National Mall? 15,000 people came for a protest on immigration reform, and they opened up the National Mall. So it's a disturbing pattern. If you agree with the President and his policies, we're going to do everything within our power to use government to help you get where you need to be. If you disagree with me, we're going to use our government to bludgeon you and use it as a tool to further our political agenda. That's happened with the IRS. When it comes to the nonprofit status of various organizations, it happened with our Capitol Mall and our Capitol monuments. And all I'm saying is that I find it so incredulous that the President is willing to overstep his boundaries and unconstitutionally do things through executive order. And yet when he has the power, and we've given him the power, he's not willing to do it. I find those inconsistencies extremely disturbing and a little bit Machiavellian. And so I would hope that the President would look at what we're trying to do through this process. We have a responsibility to the people that elected us to make the laws as good as we possibly can. The last proposal that we put on the table was that we would delay the individual mandates so that every American, as you said, Mr. DeSantis, every American could get the same deal that big business with their great lobbyists here in Washington, D.C. got, and that members of Congress got. They would get the same consideration. And the other part was that we would make sure that Congress lived under the same laws everybody else has to. Pretty common sense approach. So much so that multiple Democrats agreed with us and voted with us to pass that and send it to the President. But what did Harry Reid do? Shoved it in his drawer at the behest of President Obama. It's time to stop these reckless games. Mr. President, you've already shown that you're very willing to use your executive powers far beyond your scope of authority given you to the Constitution. Is it unreasonable for us to ask you to use your powers when you're given them to do the right thing? And I yield back to the gentleman from Florida.
Well, I thank the gentleman from Arizona for those great comments. And I think he brings up a great point about the funding bill that was sent the day before the fiscal year ended was not demanding that the President fully repeal the health care law. It basically had two very reasonable policy asks. One, that members of Congress live under the exact terms of the law that they passed and not get any type of special unauthorized treatment. And then two, that individuals be given the same courtesy that the President gave to big business. And that was very reasonable. The press hasn't really reported that. That's not really the way they framed it, and I'm not surprised at that. But that is a vote by standing beside the Senate Majority Leader, all those senators who did that. That's going to be a vote that's going to reverberate into the future. And I think it's interesting because when we're talking about the proper constitutional authority of the President, our primary means to check the President is the power of the purse. And so that's basically what we're doing in terms of we're sending the funding bill, but we're saying, look, we cannot afford to continue going with this disparate treatment throughout society. I mean, you've got to treat everybody the same. And I'll yield to the gentleman from Oklahoma.
Well, I just wanted to ask you a quick question, which is when you consider the fact that the media reporting is very different from what I have perceived in this body as a member of Congress, I'm more astonished every day at how the media reports the story. But the very last ask that we made before the government shut down was about 1 o'clock in the morning. So I guess technically the government had been shut down for about an hour. And that very last ask was simply a meeting. It was simply a conference so that people on their side and people on our side could come together and discuss Obamacare and some of the problems that we have with it. Now, when you talk about the constitutional and the constitutional process that we have, and you have divided government, I'd like to ask the gentleman from Florida, is that not a perfectly reasonable adult way of handling disputes?
Well, I thank the gentleman for the question. That is not only an adult way, that is exactly the way that the Founding Fathers envisioned it. James Madison, when he wrote about the different branches, the separation of power, checks and balances, he said, ambition must be made to counteract ambition. So you have an executive that gets beyond their scope. He expected the legislature to check that. And so in this instance, we're saying, wait a minute, you can't unilaterally delay the law for business but then leave the rest of the American people holding the bag. You can't let Congress, the people who are imposing this laws on others, get out from under the exact text of the law. So in that sense, that's exactly the way the system is supposed to work. Now, he has a different view of basically the Congress needs to do what he decrees, and then he will grant Congress the courtesy of actually discussing issues with them. That would not have probably gone over very well with the Founding Fathers. I just want to make another point, because the gentleman from Arizona brought up how Obamacare was passed and kind of the genesis of it. And some of our friends on the other side of the aisle, they say, how could you guys be talking about this? It's the law, kind of move on. Not giving any credence to the 55% of Americans who are being negatively affected by it. But you compare the way that law was passed to any other major piece of legislation. I pulled some interesting numbers. Social Security, 1935. In the House of Representatives, 96% of the Democrats voted for it, 81% of the Republicans voted for it. Interstate highway system under Eisenhower, 93% of the Democrats in this body voted for that, 98% of the Republicans in this body voted for it. Civil Rights Act in 1964, maybe the most important piece of legislation of the 20th century. 61% of the Democrats in the House voted for that piece of legislation, 80% of the Republicans in the House voted for that piece of legislation. Even 1981, the Reagan Economic Program. In the Senate, 78% of the Democrats voted for Reaganomics, and 98% of Republicans voted for Reaganomics. And when the gentleman from Arizona was here, when they did welfare reform, you had a unified Republican Party joining with a number of Democrats and a Democratic president. And so when you have this bill that never received any support from the other party, and that rests on all these broken promises about your health care is going to decline by $2,500 a family, you can keep your plan, keep your doctor, we know none of that is going to be true. But I want to just ask the gentleman from Oklahoma, yield to him, because he and I had been discussing this idea of the President's responsibility to enforce border security and enforce laws related to immigration. So I'll yield you as much time as you consume so that you can discuss that.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's perfectly appropriate that we have